It's time. Assaulting the narrative. Destroying the lies.
John Gordon.
Unearthing the truth.
You can't handle the truth.
Live from West Palm Beach, Florida. Heard coast to coast and all around the world.
John Gordon.
High Noon with John Gordon.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to The Truth. This is John Gordon, and we're going to tell you the truth today. We've got another good show for you. We've got two authors that are coming on that have just released a new book. David Mantik and Jerome Corsi have authored The Final Analysis, Further Nurturing Our Obsession Over the JFK Assassination. They've actually conducted forensic analysis. Dr. Mantik is a medical doctor. Dr. Corsi is a PhD. And I'm looking forward to speaking to them. And we're going to talk about how Donald Trump might be JFK 2.0, which is what I do truly believe. So thank you for joining us on The Truth today, all of our listeners all up and down the East Coast. In West Palm Beach, we have a beautiful day today where it is 77 degrees right now. One of the prettiest days that we've had all year, just a light little wind and clear skies. In Atlanta, my hometown, where we come to you on WMLB at 67 degrees. And in Nashville, we come to you on the Flame 760 at 65 degrees. Pittsburgh, 50 degrees, where we come to you on WCNS and WXJX. Liberty Radio in Philadelphia, where it's 55 degrees. Richmond, 62 on our mother load station, our hometown station there. News Talk WJFN, and in Norfolk, WJFV at 64 degrees. You can also watch us live right now on Getter.com. Just go to Getter.com, hit the live button, and look for The Truth with John Gordon. We're also live on Rumble.com. In fact, all of our past episodes are uploaded to Rumble.com. So if you want to go look at a later time and review an episode that we've had, they're all right there just waiting for you. You can also send those episodes to your friends and family. And while you're at it, may I ask you just one little tiny favor? When you go to those websites, Getter, Rumble, and YouTube Live, if you would simply subscribe and hit the like button, only if you do, then we would be very grateful to you. That helps us. We are wanting to build our exposure and reach more people, and that's how we can do it. So if I could just ask you that tiny little favor, I would be so grateful. I hope you enjoy the show. We do spend a lot of time preparing and working to get good guests for you. And if you like that, if you'd subscribe to us, that would be a big help. You can also go to patreon.com, look for John Gordon Truth. And if you'd like to, you can subscribe and support the channel that way. Just like First Liberty of Georgia supports us, they are our sponsor for today's show. And we will be talking about First Liberty of Georgia a little bit more later on. But today's monologue is entitled Lies, Lies, Lies. And I think it would be such an easier world, a better world, if our leaders chose to just tell the truth. Put your faith in the American people. We can handle it. Just tell us the truth. That's really all we want. But for some reason, it seems to be easier, more expedient. Maybe they think it's better to just lie. And the whole show today is really about lies. And it started for me with the Kennedy assassination and the lies that they've told for 60 years. We're going to expose those lies today. But first, let's talk about Joe Biden and his lies. You know inflation is just transitory.
I really doubt that we're going to see an inflationary cycle.
It will have a temporary or transitory impact.
The faster than expected increase in some of those prices is actually a good sign.
The overwhelming consensus is going to pop up a little bit and then go back down. No one's talking about this great,
this is something that will settle down.
Transitory.
Most of the price increases we've seen were expected and are expected to be temporary. It's highly unlikely that's going to be long-term inflation that's going to get out of hand. I don't know anybody who's worried about inflation.
Over the last couple of months, we actually saw it trended downward.
President Biden's chief of staff, Ron Klain, enthusiastically retweeted an economist who had said in part most of the economic problems we're facing, inflation, supply chains, et cetera, are high-class problems.
The number one thing that the president can do is help get COVID under control. That we know is the root cause of inflation.
President Biden this afternoon saying he thinks we're at the peak of the crisis right now and that lower prices are on the way.
The inflation has everything to do with the supply chain. Make no mistake, inflation is largely the fault of Putin.
If you want to get rid of inflation, the only way to do it is to undo a lot of the Trump tax cuts.
Our inflation rates are lower than other nations in the world.
The inflation we're seeing is due to the pandemic.
When inflation hit a new high last week, the administration of President Biden called the numbers out of date.
I just want to say a number. 0.
I mean, how can you sit there and listen to this? While the American people are suffering, they're making choices between food, medicine, and rent, and gas. How do these people sleep at night? How do they sleep at night? I've told you before, if I've told a fib, it worries my conscience. I learned the lesson at a very young age. I was 6 years old, and I went over to my friend's house across the street, and their dad was painting a fence, and he was painting it kind of a maroon red. Well, I made the mistake of touching the fence, and I left a little handprint. So he was continuing to paint the fence, and at some point he looked back and saw this little handprint on his newly painted maroon red fence. And he said, "Who put their hand on my fence? Did you do it, Sally?" "No." "Did you do it, Janie?" "No, Daddy." "Well, who did? Did you do it, John?" "No." "Okay, everybody turn your hands over." "Yeah, you got it. I had red paint on my hand." It was a lesson that I needed to learn. I felt such shame and guilt, and it taught me, just don't lie. But these people don't have any shame. They don't evidently feel any guilt. They just continue to tell you that everything is okay. You know, I celebrated a birthday this year. I was born in 1953. That's the truth. What else would it be? Who would lie about that? 71 years old this week. Do you know that when I was born, a gallon of milk was 94 cents? Today it's $4.18. A loaf of bread was 16 cents. Today, $1.81. A new automobile, get this one, $1,800. Today, the average is $33,695. A gallon of gas was 22 cents, $4 and a penny today. A new home was $17,400. Today, it's $428,000. The average income was $4,011. Today, it's $53,924. And the Dow Jones Industrial Average was 280. Today, it is approaching 40,000. We're about 38,000. So inflation is not a new phenomenon. In the 70s, when Gerald Ford was president, we had rampant inflation. Fuel prices were going through the roof just like they are now. It was the result of a failed administration from Jimmy Carter. And the massive government spending that he ushered in led to rampant inflation. Everybody knows that the government spending of money that we don't have is textbook the cause of inflation. But these people in Washington want you to believe it's Putin's fault, that it's the COVID vaccine's fault, that it was the supply chain fault. Of course, those events were now 2 and 3 years ago. So they count on the American people being idiots and people that they can play. But the fact of the matter is, I don't think anyone is fooled. Even the mainstream media is starting to call out the administration, if you can imagine that. As the Fed tries to tame inflation, they've got a couple of tools that they can use. One is that they cannot buy government bonds, which is what they've done in the past when the economy was in trouble. They would just buy billions upon billions upon billions of dollars in U.S. bonds, which would artificially reduce the supply, and that which would cause the price of bonds to go up. That's when the economy is lagging. They want to help the economy that way. The way that they can tame inflation is not to buy those bonds and to raise interest rates, artificially raising interest rates. And that has worked to an extent. We've gone from a high of 9% inflation down to a low of about 3.2%. But now this week, the inflation rate, the rise in the GDP increased 3.7%, sending the country and the markets into shock. One of the things that concern me the most is that Biden is trying to impact inflation by having released our strategic petroleum reserves. That's his attempt to create more supply for gasoline so that the price of gasoline will fall. There is a big, big risk to that. And I don't know. I've questioned on this show repeatedly, is it incompetence or is it an intentional act to destroy our country? Frankly, I think it's a lot of both, but I really do believe that Trump or that Biden should be tried for treason. When you zoom out and you look at all the things that he's done, it appears to me to be an intentional effort to destroy our country at worst, significantly alter it at best. And of course, I think that's coming directly from Barack Obama, who is securely and squarely in charge of the White House. All of his people are there. All of Biden's cabinet came out of the Obama administration, at least a large majority. So here's another lie that Biden made, and it is just shocking to me that anybody would be so brazen.
As you remember, when you and I shouldn't say it that way, as you remember, but when you and I talked last, we talked about, it's one thing to have the vaccine, which we didn't have when we came into office, but a vaccinator. How do you get the vaccine into someone's arm?
Okay, so he says that we did not have a vaccine when he came into office. Really? Well, let's watch this little clip.
Would you like Mr. Trump to speak?
No, you just go ahead anytime you're ready.
Jabbed Joe Biden in the arm. That video was recorded on December the 22nd, 2020, before the serial liar took his oath of office to become the 46th president of the United States. And I would hasten to add, an illegitimate president. That's what I believe. I've seen the evidence. I've told you. I'll continue to tell you. The election was not real. It was faked. It was stolen. And we're going to talk about that with our guest in just a little while when we talk about Donald J. Trump being JFK 2.0. But that's not all Biden lies about. He lies about the border. He's told us that the border is safe and secure. Really?
Sending back the vast majority of the families that are coming. We're trying to work out now with Mexico their willingness to take more of those families back. But that's what's happening. They're not getting across the border.
Yeah, all you have to do is turn on the television, go to YouTube, and you watch thousands of people crossing the southern border. More people have entered the United States illegally. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Pelosi. Should I have said undocumented? They've entered illegally more than in the history of any president prior to Joe Biden. Trump had the influx of illegals on the southern border slowed to a trickle when he left office. He built hundreds of miles of the wall, and you can see on the most recent video that was posted that was on the news where there were hundreds of people trying to get through a wall of Border Patrol agents and National Guardsmen and through barbed wire, and they crashed through the guards, they crashed through, crawled under, stepped over the barbed wire, and they ran full speed ahead into the wall that Trump built. The first thing that Joe Biden did when he became president is he suspended building the wall. Now, here's what's going to happen. Mark my word, ladies and gentlemen. He's just issued an executive order to stop the influx of the undocumented. God, I hate the way they spin things like that. The illegal aliens from entering the United States. He's also said that we should resume building the wall. He's also pulled people out of other agencies like the Department of Transportation, TSA, and other Homeland Security, and put them on the southern border, exposing us to other threats. And now he is going to claim, I predict in June or July, when they slow the influx of people crossing the border illegally, that he has solved the border crisis that he created. I don't know about you, but I hate to be lied to. It sparks a reaction in me that is difficult for me to control. It really does make me angry to be lied to. And I don't know why I have such a strong negative reaction to it, other than it feels like the person that's telling the lie is just playing me as a fool. It's like they don't think I'm smart enough to know that they're lying. But you can't deal or reason with somebody that lies. It's just a waste of time and energy. Well, you know I'm a Trumper. You know I like Trump. You know I respect and appreciate everything that he's gone through and continues to go through. But you know what? He's not a saint either. I mean, you remember his statements about his inauguration?
The crowd was massive. That was all the way back down to the Washington Monument.
It looked like 1 million, 1.5 million people to get this network. And it showed an empty field. And it said we drew 250,000 people. Now, that's not bad, but it's a lie.
This was the largest audience to ever witness an inauguration, period.
Oh, my gosh. Okay. Well, I don't know about you, but here's how I distinguish those. Who cares? And what difference does it make? Now, I know that this is a fine line that I'm drawing here, but Donald Trump is a promoter. He is a marketer. He is a salesman. We all know that salesmen, and I'm a salesman, are prone to puff. They exaggerate. They embellish. Okay? But in this case, was it material in any way other than a reflection of Donald Trump's ego and what many people may identify as narcissism? Okay, I'll give you that one. I'll give it to you. I agree. But I don't consider it material. I think that when I'm lied to about inflation, how are we going to solve the problem if we deny it? When you blatantly tell me that there wasn't a vaccine and we saw you on television getting inoculated before you became president, and you're going to tell us that there wasn't a vaccine?
Hey, Rob.
And then you talk about the border?
Did you call me?
And you're telling us that...
I didn't.
And then you're going to tell us that the border is secure and we can see hundreds and thousands of people crossing the border illegally, and we know that they're military age fit men, and then you disperse those people across the country and you put them in the heartland of the United States. It's enough to make me really nervous. And then there's enough fentanyl here already that came from China that flooded across the southern border to kill every living American. It's enough to make me really nervous. They have stopped at the border people bringing across guns and ammunition, and we know that they have interdicted people from our enemies, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan. Terrorist states are coming to the United States, and this is what I'm afraid of. And I'm not trying to alarm you, but by gosh, we better be aware. But I don't know, I've used the analogy with my friends, but I don't know if you've ever been outdoors and you mistakenly have sat, God forbid, or stepped on an anthill. I have. I do a lot of hunting, and so I've been in the dove field before, and all of a sudden I will look down and there are hundreds of ants on my legs and arms. They've crawled all over my body, but you don't really feel them. You're not aware that they're even there. And then all of a sudden, they all sting you at the same time. It is a phenomenon. And there's some way that those ants communicate with one another. And one of them says, sick 'em, get 'em. And they all do. Oh, wow, boy, does it hurt. And then itches for the next week. But here's what I'm fearful of. I believe, and I think we've got plenty of evidence to justify the belief, that our enemies have been implanted inside the United States in sleeper cells, and that they are planning an attack on our country. By the way, I'm not alone in that belief. So does Christopher Wray. And he has said it, and he's testified before Congress about his concerns and his fears, and I'm right there with him. But if we cannot tell the truth, how are we going to fix it? That's my big concern. Well, Donald Trump is going to be called to task on another of his lies. I'm sorry, Mr. President, I love you. But we're all sinners, and he is not without fault. And he's going to have to atone this week in Lower Manhattan in the Stormy Daniels trial. The audio is not very clear here. This is a clip that was taken on Air Force One during his presidency, so it's pretty old. It goes back about 6 years, I believe. Just listen intently, and if you listen carefully, I think you can make out the audio.
$130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels. Then why did Michael Cohen make it if there was no truth or allegation?
Well, you have to ask Michael Cohen. Michael's my attorney, and you'll have to ask Michael.
All right, so basically a reporter asked him, where did the money come from to pay Stormy Daniels? Trump denied knowing anything about it. They asked him, well, what about Michael Cohen? Where did he get the money, or did he pay the money? And Trump said, I don't know. You'll have to ask Michael Cohen. So he is going to be called to task this week by this liberal Democrat in New York, the DA, is going to put him on trial, and President Trump is going to have to sit there, and he's going to have to listen to Michael Cohen continue to lie. Michael Cohen may just tell the truth, but I guess what I should have said is Michael Cohen is an admitted, convicted perjurer. And he is serving a jail time right now for having told those lies, and some of them relate to the Stormy Daniels fiasco. Here's how I distinguish it. And you may not like this, and I understand it if you don't. But here's my paradigm. I don't care. I really don't. I was talking to a friend this week, and this is somebody I really love and admire and respect. And I was talking about Biden's lies, and she said to me, well, you don't think Trump lies? I said, yeah, well, he lies. And before I could finish my sentence, she said, you don't think he slept with Stormy Daniels? You believe that's just not, you don't believe that's true? You don't think he's lied about it? I had to confess, yeah, I do think it's true. Yeah, he slept with Stormy Daniels. And yeah, Michael Cohen paid hush money. And yeah, he was reimbursed for it, at least some of it, if not all of it. I don't care. I really don't. It is none of my business. People leave companies in America every single day of the year, and they are given a non-disclosure agreement to sign in exchange for severance, money. Tell me how that's any different. Tell me how it is any different to agree to cover up and not disclose improprieties or wrongdoing or law breaking by a corporation and getting paid money and signing a non-disclosure agreement to do it. And do we throw those people in jail? Are we on a witch hunt to go get them? And I'll tell you the same thing I said when my mother-in-law and I were having a conversation about Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. And I said, I don't care. And she said, I don't either. You know why? It's none of my business. It is not germane, in my view, to how someone runs the country. Now, if you ask me about a policy matter or an illegal act that is committed by our government, then I do care. But if you're asking me about a domestic affair, my answer is it's between he, his wife, and his maker. I've tried to be a good husband. I've been married for 46 years. None of us are perfect. We are all sinners. There is not one thing that I have ever kept from my wife. She knows everything there is to know about me, and I think I know everything there is to know about her. And for voyeurs or people that want to pry inside our marriage and our family and our house, screw you. It's none of your business. That's what I think. And that's what I think about Donald Trump. And that's what I think about Stormy Daniels. But that's not what I think about Alan Weisselberg, who President Trump paid the tuition for his son or daughter, I think it was his son, to go to a private school. He did not disclose it on his tax return. They prosecuted him for tax evasion, and then he did not tell the truth about it. It would have been so much better had he told the truth. Had he just said, yeah, it was a gift. And that's what it was. He should have disclosed it as a gift, but most of all, he should not have lied about it. It's the lies, it's the cover-ups that always get the person in trouble. All right, well, we've never been told a bigger lie than that Lee Harvey Oswald killed John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And it's a lie that persists to this day, and those of us who question it are wild-eyed conspiratorialists. That's not what David Mantik and Jerome Corsi say. And it's my pleasure to welcome them to the truth. Good afternoon, Dr. Corsi and Dr. Mantik.
Hello, John.
Hi, John.
Well, thank you for joining us on The Truth. And you've just published this new book. And you both of you have been students of the Kennedy assassination like I have since 1963, when I watched with horror the events of November 22nd as I was home from the 4th grade with the flu. And I developed an obsession about the Kennedy assassination from that day, and I kind of let it subside until I was in college. And a friend of mine named Jerry from Chicago read A Rush to Judgment by Mark Lane, and he did a book report on it for our political science class, and it opened my eyes to the multitude of questions surrounding the Kennedy assassination. And you've spent a lifetime looking into it. Dr. Corsi, I'll ask to start with you. Tell us about your book. What motivated you to write it, and how did you uncover the evidence that you have presented in this extremely well-written book that I have not finished but fully intend to?
Well, the book is Assassination of John F. Kennedy, The Final Analysis. The book is really about David Mantik's research. We wrote it in the first person. I'm going to let David explain his research, but David has seen the JFK autopsy skull x-rays more than anyone else, and he's done optical density measurements of the skull x-rays with a densitometer, which is a scientific apparatus that can measure millimeter by millimeter, sometimes tenth of a millimeter by tenth of a millimeter, the amount of light coming through an x-ray, and it permits you to know what the x-ray is about, what you're seeing, what you're looking at. And Dr. Mantik has just demonstrated that the 3 extant skull x-rays in the National Archives from JFK's autopsy are all forgeries. They're all fake. They are all not the originals. They've been masked, various elements added to the x-ray to mask evidence of frontal shots. And the x-rays show clear evidence of 3 shots to JFK's head, 2 from the front and 1 from the rear. And I'll let, that's kind of an introduction, but the book is, Dr. Mantik's been writing about this for about 3 decades. His writing has been very scientific. He's very, very highly respected within the JFK community. And this book, we decided to make it accessible to any reader by putting the science in the appendices and making the text read kind of like almost like a mystery story. We think it's pretty gripping. And so let me do that much of an introduction and then turn it over to David for his comments.
Well, for our listeners, both of these gentlemen, Jerome Corsi is a PhD from Harvard University. He has authored 6 New York Times bestsellers. He is a celebrated author. And Dr. Mantik, as I mentioned at the top, is a medical doctor and PhD, and has spent many decades researching this. Dr. Mantik, how did you get access to the x-rays and the materials that you used to do the research?
I had to write a letter to Burke Marshall, who was the Kennedy family attorney. It took him 12 months to respond to my letter. He never explained why it took so long, but that's exactly what happened.
And so you had to get permission from the family, in effect, to be able to go and examine the x-rays?
From the attorney, Burke Marshall.
Okay, but through their attorney to get access to the x-rays that are at the National Archives. Is that right?
Right.
So what did you find when you got, and how much material were you allowed to look at?
Well, I've been there 9 times altogether. Each time was a full day from morning till late afternoon. So no one else has come close to looking at these materials as long as I have or in as much detail as I have. So I have hundreds and hundreds of data pieces that I have compiled in 3 separate notebooks. I've located all the metallic fragments on all the x-rays. And much of this I've reported in my work as well, including the books that we're talking about here today.
So what did you talk to us about the x-rays and what you found? And do you feel like that's the most compelling evidence that you uncovered?
Yes, for me as a radiologist, or more specifically as a radiation oncologist, the x-rays are absolutely compelling. The government's case against Lee Harvey Oswald was based on 2 fraudulent pieces of information. One was a 6.5 millimeter cross section of what appears to be a bullet inside of JFK's right orbit, as seen on the frontal X-ray. And the other second piece of fraudulent evidence was the photograph of the back of JFK's head at the autopsy. That photograph shows the scalp to be intact. We can't say anything specifically about the skull from the photograph because we can't see the skull. But virtually every witness in Dealey Plaza, at Parkland Hospital, and at the autopsy saw a large baseball-sized hole at the back of the head. So the government used these two fraudulent pieces of information, the cross-section on the X-ray and the fake photograph of the back of JFK's head, to say that there was only one shot to the head and that it came in from the rear and it was fired by Lee Harvey Oswald. Of course, the cross-section size of 6.5 millimeters is quite striking in itself, because Oswald supposedly had a weapon that was 6.5 millimeters across, at least the bullets were. And the cross-section supposedly lies on the back of the skull, as seen in the X-ray. And so this supposedly ties Oswald to the shooting from the Texas School Book Depository. Unfortunately for the government, we now know that both of these pieces of information have been faked and were not actually present on the original autopsy photograph, and the cross-section of the so-called bullet fragment on the X-ray was not there. And we know that for sure because of the dozens of people who were at the autopsy. Absolutely no one reported it. It's not in the autopsy report. That so-called piece of metal is not in the archives. No one has ever seen it. It simply wasn't there at that time.
So do you think that Oswald played a role in the assassination?
Well, Oswald said he was a patsy. I think most people who have studied this case closely would agree that Oswald had some degree of knowledge. We don't actually know how much he knew. It would have been interesting to find out, but I think that information is forever lost. So I'm quite sure that he did not expect to be accused of this crime, however.
Well, I have read extensively about the assassination, and there is compelling evidence, I believe, that would suggest that Oswald was not even in the sniper's nest that day. There are two ladies that worked adjacent to the break room, and they both testified that Oswald was sitting at the table drinking a Coca-Cola 5 minutes before the assassination, maybe it was 10. And then immediately following the assassination, the manager of the school book depository was ushering a Dallas policeman through the building to go up to the sniper's nest, and they passed through the break room. Oswald was sitting, and no one disputes this, at the same table where the other two witnesses had reported that Oswald was sitting before the assassination, and that he was still sitting there calmly drinking a Coca-Cola. And it was shortly after, and the cop said, "Who is that?" And the manager said, "Oh, he works here." And they both just continued to run up the stairs to the sniper's nest in pursuit of whoever did pull the trigger. So I don't know that. The one thing that there are two things, and I'm getting off track just a little bit here, but there are two things that concern me about Oswald. One is that he was alleged to have fired at a retired general in Highland Park in the weeks or months leading up to the Kennedy assassination. Are you familiar with that event?
Yeah, the general held the bullet or bullet fragment in his hand, and then he was asked about this later, and he said, "What I had in my hand does not match what you have in evidence. They don't fit together."
Interesting. And then we know that Officer J.D. Tippit was shot and killed within an hour after the assassination. Do you have a theory about Oswald and J.D. Tippit? Or some people speculate that the person that killed Tippit was not Oswald, but someone that closely resembled Oswald. There are a lot of writings about a second person who looked a lot like Oswald, and that maybe he was the one that killed Tippit. My own theory is that Tippit was looking for Oswald, and that he was dispatched to find Oswald and kill him, and Oswald seemingly knew Tippit. Tippit got out of the car very relaxed, walked towards Oswald, and that's when he allegedly shot Tippit. Your theory or your belief?
Well, I really like the book written by Joe McBride. It's I think 600 or 700 pages long and analyzes this whole case in great detail. Joe concludes that no, Oswald could not possibly have shot Tippit. So somebody else did it. One can suspect that Tippit was taken out because he had failed to do his specific job that day, but that's getting a little bit into speculation. But anyway, it wasn't Oswald.
Yeah, but Oswald was seen fleeing or running down the street proximate to Tippit's murder, and was seen by
someone like Oswald was seen.
Well,
whether
yeah,
it was really Oswald is debatable.
Well, this guy, whoever it was, Oswald or somebody else, did enter the theater, and that is where Oswald was arrested moments later.
Two people were arrested there, so the story gets very confusing.
I have read that as well, and that
John,
second, yes.
One of the interesting things about what Dr. Manning's work has done, and this book shows it. In fact, you can see in the cover, there are the blue arrow, a red arrow, and a yellow arrow. These are the 3 shots to the head that hit Jack Kennedy. Now, the difference between Dr. Manning's work and what we're talking about with Tippit and the like is that Dr. Manning's work is definitive. It's not questionable. It's indisputable. So what we have here with the X-rays, especially with the optical density measurements, is, for instance, there is a bullet that comes into the right forehead. You can see it on the picture of the cover. In fact, it's got a blue arrow.
Right,
you can see the trace of metal going through the top of the head, this top right quadrant of the head. And the largest fragment is at the back. So it's got a clear bullet hole, a bullet trail. With the largest fragment at the back, it's the heaviest. It has the most momentum. And when a bullet breaks up in the skull, the largest fragments go to the back. So that's clearly a frontal shot. And it comes in right at the entrance point is where the arrow pierces the skull right there. So that's clearly a frontal shot. And secondly, there was a shot in the temporal bone right by the right ear, just above the right ear, and it blew out the back of JFK's head. Now, this shot came from the grassy knoll. You can see that's an oblique shot, tangential shot. It hits an angle to the head, and a shot that comes in at an angle creates a keyhole fracture. So at that point of that red arrow right there, you see a keyhole fracture. And that's again, very clear forensic evidence. It's like CSI. This is not, we don't have to speculate of, was it really, who shot Tippit? We know that there were 2 frontal shots. The third shot was a shot to the back of the head, and it hit at the knob in the back of the head from a low angle, not the Texas School Book Depository, probably the Daltex building behind Jack Kennedy. Now, we also have, discussed in the book, there was a shot through the windshield, and there was a puncture entrance wound at JFK's neck. Now, these are all facts, and they're provable by the examination of the X-rays, which Dr. Mantik has done more than anyone else, and has done all these scientific measurements to prove this point. Now, that means there's at least 3 shooters. There's a shooter that was shooting through the windshield that's on the south side of Dealey Plaza, where there's the triple underpass, and then there's a railroad yard above it. So there's a shooter behind that concrete fence at the top of the triple underpass on the other side from the grassy knoll. Then there's a shooter on the grassy knoll that shoots and hits Jack Kennedy in the temple and blows out the back of his head. And the low angle puts it at the entrance wound from the rear, the yellow arrow, puts a shooter behind. That's at least 3 shooters. Now, the blue arrow might have been a second shooter on the grassy knoll. Depending on the angle where Kennedy's head was when that shot occurred, it could also have been the shooter that was on the south side up by the railroad yard. We don't know precisely, but what we do know is that it was a frontal shot, or two frontal shots, and one from the rear. We can do somewhat of the sequence because a big piece of bone from the back, of the occipital part of the bone, or the head, back part of the head, was blown out, and it ended up on the grass on the south side of the knoll. It was found. It's called the Harper fragment, and that fragment shows both a entrance wound from the low angle, and then it was blown out, so it's evidence of an exit wound. So probably the yellow arrow hit first, and then within a few seconds, and again, I think if you look at the Zapruder film, 313, you see a shot that's coming in, and Jack Kennedy's head moving forward, and there's a spray of blood and material coming out from the front of the head, which much of it was dislodged. A lot of the brain is missing from the gunshots. And then a few frames later, like at about 331 or 232, you can see Jack Kennedy's head's exploding in the side. You actually see the explosion, and that's when he was pushed violently back into the left. Okay, so these shots are proof that there was a crossfire. A crossfire, especially with shots from the front, mean that Lee Harvey Oswald was not the lone gun shooter. In fact, I doubt he fired any shots that day at all. He failed the paraffin test.
True.
He said he didn't shoot anybody. And so what the key point about why this book is so important and why it's documented, it's got 1,000 footnotes in it. Government documents are extensively used. Everything in here is in the public record. And so therefore, this book uniquely, given Dr. Mantik's work, establishes CSI evidence that proves Jack Kennedy was shot in a crossfire. There's lots of other elements of this case which yet may never be known. You know, sometimes in great crime stories, people understand that, you know, some of the greatest crime writers have written that there's something about every murder that's probably not ever going to be solved. But this CSI evidence is concrete, indisputable, scientific. And what makes this book different is that after we published this book and made it available for anyone to read, you can no longer have this lying narrative blaming the assassination on Lee Harvey Oswald when in fact it was a coup d'etat. Government started covering this up from the first moments. The limousine after the shooting went directly to Parkland Hospital. The Secret Service gets a pail of water. It's seen on film. They begin washing out the backseat of the limousine with the blood and the gore. That's altering a crime scene. Various people see a puncture wound in the windshield. It's obviously a frontal shot because it enters with like a pencil hole, and the backside, inside the limousine, the glass bevels and sprays forward, and there were glass marks on JFK's cheeks from the glass shattering, and Dr. Mantik believes that the bullet that entered in the throat may not have been a bullet, it may have been a shred of the glass, because no bullet was ever found. But the point is that the Secret Service was altering the evidence. Then they got the car out of there. They cordoned it off. They wouldn't let anybody see the car. When Jack Kennedy was pronounced dead, the coroner, Earl Rose, and the Justice of the Peace showed up in the trauma room in Parkland Hospital and said, "This is a local murder. This is a Dallas crime. There's no federal law about killing the president. We're doing the autopsy here." The Secret Service had gotten from a mortuary an ornate ceremonial casket. Nurses wrapped Jack Kennedy's body in sheets and put it in that casket. The Secret Service agents put Earl Rose and the Justice of the Peace up against the wall at gunpoint, and they took the body away. So you again have a lot of evidence from the very first moments that the government is now concerned about getting the body. They have to have the body. And the Parkland Hospital doctors went out and told in a press conference a couple hours after the assassination, Malcolm Perry and Clark Kemp, they said that Jack Kennedy was shot by gunshots from the front. And they said that 7 or 8 times. And it's on the record. There is a transcript of the still existing of that press conference. And Malcolm Kildoff, who was the press secretary for the president, traveling with the motorcade, a few minutes after the assassination, went on, gave a press conference at Parkland Hospital. Again, there's video of it, transcript of it, and Kildoff points to his right forehead He said Jack Kennedy was killed, it was simple, by a shot to the head. They say, where did it come from? They say the right front. Okay, so at Parkland Hospital, these doctors knew they could see the blowout in the back of Jack Kennedy's head. Doctors said they could look down and see in the skull there was maybe a third of the brain missing. The cerebellum, which is this organ at the very back of your head, different color than the rest of the brain, was hanging out. At least a third of all this right side of Kennedy's head had been largely blown away, and this big gaping hole in the back left no doubt that there was a frontal shot. So now the government had a problem because framing Lee Harvey Oswald, a photographer for the AP named Elchins had taken a picture from the front of the limousine as Jack Kennedy is shot. He's holding his arms. You can see him through the windshield, up at his throat. And behind Jack Kennedy is the Texas School Book Depository. So now they've got a body with frontal shots. Secret Service has control of the body. And they have a problem with about an hour in the flight going back to Washington, D.C. The government, the Dallas police announced they've apprehended Lee Harvey Oswald. They announced that he is the assassin. They find 3 shells from bullets in the 6th floor window of the Texas School Book Depository. The book.
I think Dr. Corsi, there you're back. You froze just for a moment.
I said, so the government's got a problem because they found 3 shells up in the 6th floor window. That's where the sniper was supposed to have been shooting. Found these boxes all arranged like a sniper's nest. And so these shots had to have come from the behind if Lee Harvey Oswald was the murderer. But in fact, the body shows the shots were from the front. Government's got a problem.
Well, if there are 2 shooters, that's a conspiracy de facto. And so it completely destroys the Warren Commission report, and it destroys everything that we've been told. And I've watched the Zapruder film. I know that, and I want to ask you about it. You believe that it's been altered, but even if it has been, even in its altered state, you can clearly see the president's head being thrown backwards and, as you pointed out, to the left. And I just don't know any law of physics under which that would result from a shot from behind. And it just defies common sense and reason that the government could put forth this explanation that Oswald was a lone gunman shooting from behind. It undermines their theory automatically. And that doesn't even get to the magic bullet theory and the fact that there now is a 4th bullet, supposedly. And so how many shooters do you believe were in Dealey Plaza on that day?
And let me do a couple of things, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Mantik for a minute. I think from what we can determine from Dr. Mantik's measurements of these 3 shots and the windshield shot, there are at least 3 shooters. How many there actually were, we don't know. But I mean, you know for a fact that there were more than one. That's what the X-ray analysis shows. That alone is game-changing information.
And there have been that people keep saying, I get a lot of conversation around this because I've been so vocal about it. And we've had several authors on this program before you gentlemen who have authored books, like David Talbot, who wrote The Devil's Chessboard. And I want to talk about that in a minute as well. But E. Howard Hunt, the famed Watergate burglar, who no one denies worked for the CIA during the Nixon years, made a deathbed confession to his son, St. John Hunt. You can go listen to it on YouTube. And E. Howard Hunt said that he was in Dealey Plaza on that day and that he was part of the CIA assassination cleanup team. In other words, he was there to step in if things got out of hand and if there was some aftermath that needed to be attended to. I don't know what all that means. I don't know what they were envisioning. But clearly, this had to take years of planning, at least months of planning. I mean, things just happened too quickly and too conveniently.
Yeah. John, also I want to point out that in terms of the shot that hit in the temple and blew out the back of Jack Kennedy's head, the Clint Hill is coming and trying to get onto the handle at the back of the trunk on the left. And when that shot occurs, which is the 3rd shot, the last shot, he sprayed on the left with brain matter as Jack Kennedy is thrown violently back to the left. The motorcycle officer, who was on the inboard inside, the one on the inside, Bobby Hargis, was also splattered by blood matter, brain matter, all this gore coming out of Jack Kennedy's head, a huge amount of brains gone. Bobby Hargis thought he'd actually been shot. He was so violently hit by this debris. And the Harper fragment lies out in the grass on the left side. Jackie Kennedy gets out of the limousine and goes to reach for a piece of Jack Kennedy's head or skull, and she's reaching on the back left side of the limousine. So it's clearly all the evidence is a shot from the grassy knoll that hit at this point here. That's definitive evidence. And because of the optical density measurements, because of all the research Dr. Mantik has done, all of his examination of these skull X-rays, the three in the archives, there's no doubt of a frontal shot. So there are many issues about the case we may never know. What exactly Howard Hunt was doing there, it could be debated. But what cannot be debated is the evidence of frontal shots that these X-rays establish, which means that the entire narrative is a lie. And we publish at the end of the book, Government Narrative is a Lie. End of the book, a CIA memo that was written in 1967 that says it is the CIA's mission to run psychological operations against anyone who dares discredit or argue with the Warren Commission's finding about Lee Harvey Oswald, that the CIA is going to try to destroy that person and destroy their arguments. So this case has a lot of rabbit holes that have been created to throw everyone off.
Well,
the point is, this is solid evidence that there was shooters from the front, and it's enough to establish that everything the government told us for 60 years is a lie. You have here a deep state operation, which is a coup d'etat, not an assassination, and one that obviously had to have been carefully planned and professionally executed, even though there's a lot of mistakes.
Well, as you point out in the book, the news media reported that Lee Harvey Oswald was the assassin within an hour of the assassination, and they had a full biography of Lee Harvey Oswald. And
Correct.
We didn't have the internet then. You couldn't go to Wikipedia and learn about somebody. It was unfathomable that all of that information could have been obtained about an individual in that short a period of time.
Right. I'd like to let Dr. Mantik comment on some of this, because I've made some points to try to kind of focus the discussion on the critical part of the book. And Dr. Mantik, you might want to add to what I've said.
Well, Dr. Mantik, I want to get into the more technical and medical aspects of the book as well, but just from a very basic human level, there's nothing about the Kennedy assassination that I don't consider to be utterly revolting and despicable. And chief among those were the savage manner in which it was carried out. To think that any human being could be so savage as to kill someone while they are sitting next to their wives with families, moms, dads, and little children adjacent to the motorcade in Dallas that day, and a 10-year-old like I was watching on television, the sheer barbaric nature of it, I think, is despicable. And I've never contemplated ways to kill anybody, but there have got to be 1,000 ways to take somebody out. Why do it in such a heinous, horrible manner? Do you even have a concept or a theory on it?
Well, it's not easy to kill a national leader. Here's a good example. At the same time that Kennedy was killed in 1963, Charles de Gaulle, the leader of France, was being targeted by assassination teams, not lone nuts, but assassination teams. A total of more than 30 attempts by these professional assassins were made on de Gaulle. And do you know how many of them succeeded?
None.
0 succeeded with more than 30 attempts. Does this tell you that it's easy to take someone out? No, it's exceedingly hard.
With de Gaulle, I haven't studied that, so I don't know. But in the 1960s, it was a very different environment then. And I know that I can't remember how old I was, but I was in my teens, and I was at the Washington, D.C. Hilton Hotel, where Hubert Humphrey and Gerald Ford were both speaking to the American Bankers Association. That's the same hotel where John Hinckley allegedly shot Ronald Reagan. I was inside the hotel with my parents attending that bankers convention, and I walked right up to Hubert Humphrey. I didn't see any Secret Service people. He was Vice President of the United States. No one tried to stop me or get in my way, and it's a memory that I will cherish. I walked right up to the Vice President, shook his hand, and introduced myself, and we sat there for a second and chatted. I think he would have been easy prey for anybody back then. And that was after the Kennedy assassination. I think it was much easier then than it would be today. I will grant you that. But regardless, my point is, it's bad enough that anyone would even consider killing the President of the United States, and I don't think it is distinguishable, but Kennedy was the most popular president in this graph that you include in your book since Truman, since Truman. And even through today, I can't see who's on the right side of the graph because my eyesight is not that good, but you've got a dozen presidents listed there, and Kennedy was the most popular. The nerve of someone to take out a popular and popularly elected president of the United States.
Well, if I can comment on that, I think it was in the planners, the CIA, which clearly was involved, Secret Service was involved, you had the military industrial complex involved, you had generals showing up at the autopsy giving orders as to what could and could not be done. This was a definitive statement that the deep state was in control. They wanted to go to war. They wanted to go to war in Vietnam. Jack Kennedy had signed a proclamation, National Security Memorandum, that we were pulling out our advisors and we were not going to go to war. Jack Kennedy did not go to war.
Doctor, I'm going to have to interrupt you for just 1 second. I lost track of time. We're going to be right back with Dr. Corsi and Dr. Matlik after this station identification. So we're talking to Dr. David Mantik, a medical doctor and PhD, and Dr. Jerome Corsi, who have written a fascinating book called The Final Analysis, The Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Today's broadcast is brought to you by my friends at First Liberty, Georgia. Like yourself, doing business requires a high level of trust and competence, and like you, I'm careful with who I do business with. And I've known the first owners of First Liberty, Georgia, my friend Brant Frost, since 1972. That's over 50 years. And I know his entire family, including Brant the father, Brant the son. I know a lot of our listeners are entrepreneurs, and many of you are on the MAGA side and own businesses. And we run businesses, small, medium, and large. And have you been to a bank trying to make a loan lately? If you manage a business and you want to expand, maybe you want to grow your inventory, build a new building, maybe you want to refurbish an existing one, maybe you want to expand into a new territory. If you need $250,000 to $10 million, go to firstlibertyga.com. That's firstlibertyga.com. They are my friends, Brant the fifth, Brant the fourth. They're from Noonan, Georgia, but they serve the entire United States, and they are backed by the Small Business Administration. And guess what? They've been in business since 1990. They're MAGA, they're Trump, they're the real deal. In just 10 minutes, you can get pre-qualified. Don't let the bank stand in the way of your dreams. If you want to grow your business, now is the time. FirstLibertyGA.com. That's who you can go to for financing. Go to FirstLibertyGA.com. Check these guys out in just 10 minutes. They'll give you a yes or no on up to $250,000 to $10 million. They're there for you. You're not going to get a ream of paperwork like you will if you go to a bank. Forget all about that. They are strong Christians, strong conservatives, and strong MAGA Republicans. Thank you to our friends at GeorgiaLibertyGA.com for sponsoring today's broadcast. Now back to Dr. Mantik and Dr. Corsi, where we're talking about the heinous nature of the act. And also, I think, Dr. Corsi, you mentioned that it has been so effectively covered up for 60 years. And let's get Dr. Mantik in here. And I know you're the scientist, Dr. Mantik, but maybe you could comment a bit about that. How in the world does the media get co-opted and coerced into, there's just, it is inconceivable to me that any living human being today would think that Lee Harvey Oswald acted to kill the president, certainly not acting alone to kill President Kennedy, yet the media continues to push this narrative, even today. How does that happen?
Well, that's easily explained. Take a look at the cover of this book.
For our radio listeners, it's the Central Intelligence Agency, a graphic, what's it say on the bottom? A graphic history?
Photographic history.
A photographic history.
The person whose photograph appears most often in this book is David Phillips, who is one of the top CIA officers, especially involved in Cuban and Mexican affairs. And here's what David Phillips says. He says that, he's a former journalist himself, by the way, so this is very pertinent. He says that at least 200 journalists signed secrecy agreements or employment contracts with the CIA after, I'm sorry, that was the end of the sentence. After leaving the Washington Post in 1977, Carl Bernstein spent 6 months looking at the relationship of the CIA to the media. And they published an article in Rolling Stone, which indicated that virtually all of the best known media outlets, both TV and newspaper, including the New York Times, had deep connections to the CIA. So it's very easy to understand how the media could control this narrative. They were themselves being controlled by the puppeteer who was the CIA. So there's really no mystery there.
Well, I think it may go even a little bit further than that, frankly, because in the Twitter files, we learned that the FBI paid Twitter $3.5 million to censor people if they did not go along with the COVID narrative and the vaccine narrative. And then I just read this week that the Cox Enterprises, which owns the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the Dayton newspaper, the Austin newspaper, I don't know how many radio and television stations around the nation, but hundreds.
Recording stopped.
And that they are a consultant to the Department of Defense. So I want somebody to file a FOIA and ask for all the canceled checks and invoices and documents that relate to payments made by our federal government to any established media company. And I think that we're going to be shocked with what we find out. And like they say, just follow the money. And I think it's time that we do that. I say every week on the show, it is time for a cleansing in America. We have got to start with acknowledging the bad deeds that our government has conducted and the lies that we have been told. And we need to start with the Kennedy assassination and move our way forward all the way into 2020. I call Donald J. Trump JFK 2.0. I personally believe that 2020 was a coup, and I think that it was orchestrated by the same people that killed Kennedy. The names and the faces have changed, but the titles are the same. What about you, gentlemen? What do you think?
If I can, Jen, I think even the methodology is the same.
It is.
In other words, there's a shocking event, and the government produces a narrative which is a lie, and then the media echo chambers that, and anyone who disagrees is censored. That's the psychological operation that's still being run, and it goes on and on. I mean, why did buildings that were not hit by the airplanes collapse at 9/11? Why did the building come down looking like a controlled demolition when typically a building that had been hit by an airplane would have pancaked into itself but not collapsed? What about Iraq? Where were the weapons of mass destruction that we were told Saddam Hussein had? I mean, it goes on and on. This election's the most honest election we've ever had in American history, 2020, except why do we see in the middle of the night the count stops and then all these ballots arrive in the middle of the night and the people who are supposed to be monitoring the election are thrown out of the room. When the counting starts, Biden suddenly jumps above Trump in the and all of these curves now start favoring Biden. It's obvious the number of things we've been lied about. Goes on Tonkin Gulf. So that, we're supposed to have this incident with, one of our Navy ships being attacked in the Tonkin Gulf. All these are psychological operations, and what we are doing is we're giving up freedoms. The deep state, I think, has been in charge. The CIA, the military-industrial complex, which we were warned about by President Eisenhower, together with the media, have been controlling the narrative. We've been living in a Jim Carrey Truman Show where we think it's reality, but in fact it's just government lies, and the government is getting more and more control, more and more giving up of freedoms, more and more abandoning God. And as to the horror of this shooting, this was a horrible act in public view, but the shooters were also trained cold-blooded killers. The shots were very difficult. The limousine was moving at a 3-degree angle down slope as it headed down Elm Street to go under the triple underpass. It was curving, and the shot had to not hit Jackie Kennedy. It had not to hit no Secret Service in the front of the car. 3 headshots hit Jack Kennedy. I mean, that's remarkable. Now, John Connolly got hit, but again, John Connolly said it was separate bullets that hit him, and Kellerman said there were, one of the Secret Service agent who was riding shotgun in the front of the limousine, said there were a flurry of shots. And clearly, if there's more than one shooter, you could have team shooting, 1-100, 2-100, 3-100. Everybody shoots. It sounds like one shot.
Well, John Connolly changed his story. And initially, he did say that he was shot by a separate bullet. I had lunch with John Connolly in Atlanta, circa 1988, I'm thinking, 87, 88, somewhere in there. We had a small lunch with him and some other folks. There may have been 30 people there. And and everybody was deferential. I tried to be deferential, but at the end of the lunch, I went up to him. I said, Governor Connolly, why do you maintain that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone when there is so much compelling evidence to the contrary? Well, I mean, I got a reaction I wasn't expecting. He bristled, and he said, well, why do you not think John Hinckley, why do you think he acted alone? That was his response. And I said, well, let's start with the fact that John Hinckley wasn't alleged to have visited or lived in the Soviet Union. Let's start with the fact that he wasn't seen into Moscow at the Soviet embassy in Mexico City in the days before he pulled the trigger, and went through a couple of other things, and he summarily dismissed me and wouldn't engage further. But I turned to my friend and said, I think he doth protest too much. But I think that, there were 60 people that had close association with the assassination, who had direct evidence of the assassination, who died under mysterious circumstances, like the guy who was in the train yard, and he was a switch operator, and he went to Washington to testify before the 1978 Bipartisan Select Committee on Assassinations. And the night before he was to testify, he spent the night, I believe it was in the Willard Hotel, and he woke up dead the next day. Dorothy Kilgallen is the only journalist known to have interviewed Jack Ruby in Dallas. As she came home to New York, she called her friend Mary Smith and said, read the paper this week. I'm going to blow the lid off the Kennedy assassination. She woke up dead the next morning. Barbiturate spread around her body like Marilyn Monroe's. And all of her friends said that she never took drugs, didn't have trouble sleeping, and she was dressed as if she was going out to dinner, which she was supposed to have met a friend at the Regency Hotel and never made it. By the way, all of her journalist notes were gone, her pad, her writing pad. All of her notes have never been found. So there's just, and we could go on about all the, what may seem like coincidences that were not. And I think it's one of the darkest days in our nation's history. You talked about 9/11. I don't want to get too far off track here. I have heard rumblings. I've heard innuendo. You're saying that the planes didn't bring down the buildings?
No. I'm saying that there were buildings that came down. You can see one of the buildings in the background coming down that was not hit by an airplane. Now, why did that happen?
Oh, gotcha.
Why did that happen? So I'm saying that that these are architected events. They're designed psychologically to produce a certain effect. They're often traumatic, and then people are looking for a solution, and the government provides the solution. The government wants to be the cover story. And the cover story is often designed in order to get more power. We passed the Patriot Act. Government gets a lot of powers that it didn't have. We surrender a lot of liberties that we had before then. And I'm saying the CIA has gotten extremely proficient in knowing how to create these events that change history in favor of the CIA getting more power and operating as a deep state. And I've written a lot about this in my life. I've found I caught HSBC money laundering on a massive scale, turned the evidence over to the Department of Homeland Security and to the Senate Permanent Investigating Committee. They find, this was in 2011, 2012, the government fined Department of Justice criminally HSBC $1.9 billion. Nobody went to jail. Now, the wiring, money laundering was being done for the Mexican drug cartels. You cannot run a drug business by driving around semi-trailers full of $100 bills. So the CIA has been in the drug business since probably before World War II with the OSS. And our intelligence agencies are involved in criminal activities, have off the books money slush funds to create their black ops. And these are the realities Americans are going to have to come to deal with. What is so, I think, riveting about the work Dr. Mantik did and about this book, the final analysis, Assassination of JFK, the final analysis, is that it is the final analysis, in that we now know with the X-ray analysis, the analysis of the X-rays, optical density measurements, that the 3 X-rays that are in the archives are fake. And there were 2 bullet shots to the front, which you can see in the X-rays, 1 bullet shot to the back, none from the Texas School Book Depository 6th floor window. We've been lied to for 60 years. The government's still lying. The government still won't release all the information on these at the Kennedy assassination. They're still keeping some of it top secret, and that's ridiculous. More than 60 years after the event.
Well, it violates the laws of Congress. They passed a law that said the documents had to be released 50 years after the anniversary, and they were kept secret in deference to the family. Well, I think the family has been drugged through enough. I think the family, if I was in the family, I'd want the truth to come out. Dr. Mantik, you maintain that a couple of things that I think are shocking, that the casket was switched. We saw the president's body being loaded onto Air Force One in Dallas at Love Field to be flown back to Washington and taken to Bethesda Hospital for the autopsy. But you think the casket was switched. When, where, how, and by whom?
Well, we know from multiple witnesses at Bethesda that the body arrived in a plain shipping casket. When it left Parkland, however, it was in a very ornate, a very expensive, and very heavy casket. So somewhere along the line, this got switched. And we can speculate exactly where it was. It may have happened within a few minutes after the original ornate casket was loaded onto Air Force One. That's probably the best bet, but we don't know for sure when it happened. What we do know with virtual certainty is that somewhere along the line, the body got exchanged and placed into a plain shipping casket. So many people at Bethesda verified that. They were all quite consistent.
Well, you also maintain that the president's brain was switched, if I understand correctly.
Yes, my optical density measurements show that the brain was missing a great deal on the right side. This is based on my measurements on the actual X-rays at the archives. And this is consistent with the memory of the Parkland doctors who saw a large portion of the right side of the brain missing. It's consistent with the statements of James Humes, the chief pathologist, who described a very similar scenario. Unfortunately, the official photographs of the brain do not agree with that. The official photographs show that the right side of the brain is mostly intact. So this is one of the deepest and most profound paradoxes in the entire JFK case. It makes absolutely no sense. And my optical density measurements objectively confirm that it makes no sense.
Do you think that
Douglas
President...
Horne provided a complete and compelling timeline of when these events happened. The first brain the first brain autopsy occurred on Monday, the same day of the funeral, but the second brain examination was about a week later, and the persons who were present were different. The photographer denies that these were his pictures, so none of this hangs together. There was a substitute brain put in later.
So I've got a couple of questions in the few minutes remaining. Why do you think that President Trump did not order the archives to be released? And he promised in the campaign that he was going to do so. He also intimated that Ted Cruz's father had been involved in the assassination of the president. I don't have an opinion or insight into that. But in the campaign, he seemed pretty focused on this matter. But when it came time to act, as I've read, Pompeo prevailed upon him not to unseal the records. What do you suppose was his motivation? Why did he not do it?
My guess would be the Secret Service, the CIA will come and say there's national, security secrets here that can't be revealed, whether it's tactics or operational or whatever. If the remaining, the major speculation of what's not been released is the massive amount of information that in fact the CIA was working with Lee Harvey Oswald. That's been suggested in some of the recent documents that have been released. There's probably more. But at any rate, they come to the president and they say that you cannot release these because it will do damage to national security. Here's the consequences. And by the way, I'm sure there's some documents we have about you would not like released. They may not say that directly. But again, that's always part of the subtle blackmail to get what they want. They're not beyond that. I wanted to go back to one of the points about the casket arrival, if I could, to make a couple points clear. The casket was also brought into this shipping casket, this metal shipping casket. When it was opened, what the corpsman saw was Jack Kennedy's body was in a body bag. They took it out of the body, like Vietnam. They took it out of the body bag. He was naked except for a towel wrapped around his head. Now, when the body left Parkland, it was in the ornate casket. He was wrapped in sheets. It was not naked. There was no body bag involved. So the body was taken out of that ornate casket and put into the shipping casket in order to arrive. Why? Because the government had a major problem. The problem was that Kennedy was shot from the front, and the doctors at Parkland Hospital saw it. The body evidenced that Lee Harvey Oswald was behind the president when the shooting occurred, so the shots had to come from the back. So pre-autopsy surgery was done. Doctors Humes and Boswell, an hour and a half before the body was to go into the 8 o'clock autopsy, the body arrives in the shipping casket in a body bag. Humes and Boswell set about to do surgery of the head. They take the entrance wound of the forehead, they do surgery, and they cut this all apart so it is not discernible as an entrance wound any longer. They actually saw off the parietal bone at the top of Jack Kennedy's head, and they mess up the entire inside of the head searching for bullet fragments. The photographs we have of the head on Jack Kennedy in the autopsy, which again has this metal head frame, which was not in the autopsy gallery, which was going to occur at 8 o'clock. You see Jack Kennedy's head is just a mess, and it is not the way it left Parkland. And when the casket Jack Kennedy's body is put back in the ceremonial casket, at 8 o'clock, the honor guard takes it in the gallery. They take Jack Kennedy's body out, ceremonial casket, put him on the table for doing the autopsy. The audience gasps because this head is a complete mess. It's all torn apart. And 2 FBI agents in there named Siebert and O'Neill did a 302 after-action report, and they wrote that there was pre-autopsy surgery to the head. Now that's not part of the autopsy procedure. That meant the doctors had altered the head, and Siebert and O'Neill were not medical doctors, so it's most likely when the gallery gasped and reacted, looking at how much of a mess the head was, Humes probably said there was pre-autopsy surgery of the head. It was recorded in the FBI report. So we got a couple of hard facts on this body shift. The 6:30 arrival of the casket, shipping casket, and the body bag is recorded, and the duty officer at a guy named Bijian, Boyijian, tough name to pronounce. That report exists. It arrives at 6:30. Second hard point is when the 8 o'clock autopsy begins, Siebert and O'Neill put in their 302 report that there was pre-autopsy surgery to the head. And that's the government could not let the body be seen with frontal shots when the narrative demanded that these two Navy doctors who were going to conduct the autopsy, as the primary doctors conducting the autopsy, they had been instructed, you cannot report frontal shots. Everything's got to come from the back. And we don't care what you have to do that, but that's your job. That's your assignment. And they did the pre-autopsy surgery of the body. The government's case does not fit together. There's any number of inconsistencies and holes because the government is trying to support a lying narrative. That's where the single bullet theory comes in. There were supposedly 3 cartridges found in the sniper's nest on the 6th floor, but there was also, it learned while the airplane was in flight, that James Tague, who was standing by the underpass on the other side of the highway, been hit in the cheek by a bullet that missed. So you've only got 2 shots that hit Kennedy, yet we got all the damage done to John Connolly in the jump seat. We got a wound in Kennedy's back, a wound in his neck. You've got his head blown apart. And so you've only got 2 shots. That's where our inspector comes up with the shot hitting in the back, suddenly goes up through the neck, exit, does a shift, comes and hits John Connolly, breaks his ribs, ends up in his right arm, breaks a radial bone, and then ends up in his knee, and is yet found as pristine. Single bullet theory, the magic bullet theory. It's obviously fiction, but it's the only way the government could preserve this lying narrative. So the Kennedy case doesn't fit together on the official record because the official record involves destroyed evidence, altered evidence, and lies.
Covered up evidence. In the 2 minutes remaining, I got to ask you real quick. Just give me as short of answers as you can so I can get to it. You had your brush with the Mueller investigation as well, did you not?
I sure did.
Tell us briefly about that.
Well, briefly, they thought I had a tie to Assange, and I was the one who gave the information to Roger Stone, who passed it on to Trump. And Trump was then able to influence how the Russians were going to release the emails that were stolen from Hillary. I did not have a tie with Assange. And flying over to Italy on my 25th wedding anniversary, I figured out that Assange had yet emails from John Podesta that he was going to release at the end of the campaign. And I did tell that to Roger Stone. I was sure I was right. And it turned out I was right. So the FBI, in monitoring me, was sure I had a contact with Assange, and they needed that contact to prove the Russian collusion case against Trump. So they said they were going to put me in front of a jury in Washington and put me in prison the rest of my life, or I could take a plea deal. I took the plea deal. I had to admit I had a contact that I'd lied about because I didn't want to give that contact up. I've suffered over this, prayed over it, and decided I could not lie before a judge, raising my hand, swearing before God to a lie to keep myself out of prison. I told the public day after Thanksgiving 2018 that they could put me in jail the rest of my life, but I was not going to take their plea deal. I would not lie to keep myself out of prison. They never indicted me. They closed the Mueller investigation because they lacked that link, which was all a lie.
All a lie.
It's another narrative. I told Mueller that the Russians didn't steal the emails. It was an inside job. Dr. Corsi, we're not interested in your theories. Well, I said, you ought to be, because this is true and what you guys believe is false. They didn't care. And so I would not fall for their pressure.
Well, God bless you for that. Thank you for your courage, and thank you for the book, David Mantik and Jerome Corsi. I hope you'll come back on. I got so much more I want to talk to you about, and we've doggone Father Time has marched on once again. But I appreciate your honesty, and so I don't want people to think that I am a anti-authority or anti-CIA, that I keep coming back to these things because I have a vendetta of any sort. I just want to live in an honest, ethical, moral country. I think that's a fair expectation. And here's the problem. If the CIA or whoever it was can get away with murder of the President of the United States, God help us, for what every bureaucrat in Washington can see actually happen, and that just paves the way for them to do whatever they want to, and they know that they can get away with it carte blanche. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got to change it. Write to your representatives, write to the editor of the newspaper, talk to your friends, neighbors, and parishioners. Push back. We've got to save this country. God save America, and God bless everybody. We'll see you next week on The Truth at high noon on the John Fredericks Media Network. Have a great weekend, everyone.